You're useless. My boss slammed his hand against the conference table so hard the projector screen shook behind him. 70 people went completely silent. I just stood there, laptop still open, quarterly reports still on the screen. And every single person in that room was staring at me like they were relieved it wasn't them. Damian Cross, the CEO of Veyron Dynamics, pointed directly at my face. You had one responsibility, Lelah. One. And now our biggest client is threatening to walk because you couldn't do your job. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out at first. Not because I didn't have an answer, because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The shipping failure on the screen, the one crashing deliveries across 3 states. I warned them about it 3 times, maybe 4. But Damien kept going before I could speak. I am tired of carrying dead weight in this company. A few people lowered their eyes immediately. Nobody defended me. Not Mia, not Jordan from engineering, not even HR. And that's when I realized something horrifying. This wasn't anger, it was planned. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and overheated electronics. Half the executives still had breakfast plates sitting in front of them because Damien had dragged everyone into an emergency meeting at 8 a.m. The giant dashboard behind me flashed red error messages nonstop. Failed route synchronization. Warehouse desync detected. Client escalation active. Every alert on that screen traced back to the exact system update I told management not to approve. But Damien wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at me like he needed everyone else to look too. I was 25 years old, youngest operations analyst in the building. And apparently the easiest person to sacrifice, Damien, I finally said, trying to keep my voice steady. The update was pushed without the safeguards I recommended. I emailed, I don't care about your excuses. The room got even quieter somehow. One of the investors sitting near the back leaned forward slowly. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about the system failure. This was about blame. The company's largest investor group had flown in that morning. The clients were threatening lawsuits, and Damien needed someone beneath him to throw into the fire. Me. You know what your problem is? He said. He took a step closer. You think being quiet makes you smart, but all you've done here is create problems for people who actually know how to run a business. My chest tightened because that wasn't true, not even close. I built half the operational tracking system they used every single day. Most people in that room didn't even understand how much of the company depended on the infrastructure I maintained. But Damien knew, which made this worse, way worse. He wasn't confused. He was lying deliberately. Then he said, the sentence that changed my life. Pack your things. You're done here. Nobody reacted. Not out loud, but I saw it happen. Mia froze beside me. Jordan looked down immediately. One executive quietly closed his laptop like he didn't want to witness the rest. Humiliation hit me all at once. Hot, sharp. My ears started ringing. I could feel people watching me, waiting to see if I'd cry or argue or beg for my job back. I didn't do any of that. I just stared at Damien. And for 1 second, I saw something strange on his face. Not anger, fear, Then the conference room doors suddenly opened. Two security guards walked in, and the second I saw who entered behind them, my stomach dropped. The second I saw who entered behind them, my stomach dropped. It was Evan Mercer, head of internal compliance. I had only spoken to him maybe twice in the entire year I worked at Veyron, but everybody knew what his presence meant. Legal risk, containment, damage control, and suddenly the firing didn't feel emotional anymore. It felt prepared. Evan walked in carrying a thin black folder under one arm, calm expression, perfect tie, not even slightly surprised by the chaos in the room, which told me everything. He already knew this was happening. Damien stepped back from the table and straightened his jacket like he was resetting for an audience. Miss Carter's access is being terminated immediately, he said. Not Lelah. Miss Carter. Cold, formal, final. One of the security guards moved toward me carefully, almost apologetically. Ma'am, we'll escort you to your desk. I looked around the room one more time. Still nothing. No one spoke. Not even Mia. And that hurt more than Damien yelling at me. Mia and I had worked 14-hour nights together during rollout season. We survived system crashes, impossible deadlines, executive meltdowns. She knew exactly how many warnings I sent before this update went live. I saw her glance toward me for half a second. Then she looked away. Fear. Everybody in that room was afraid. Because if Damien could do this to me publicly, he could do it to anyone. The projector behind me suddenly refreshed again. More alerts flooded the screen. Critical distribution failure. Auto reconciliation offline. A quiet wave of panic moved through the executives. One investor whispered, Jesus Christ. Damien immediately turned toward the screen. For the first time all morning, his confidence cracked. Just slightly, but I caught it. He walked quickly toward the IT director near the wall. Why is it getting worse? He snapped. The IT director looked pale. We were trying to isolate the sync issue now. You told me this was contained. We thought it was. Thought. Not new. Because they never understood the system they were changing. I did. That's why this entire thing felt insane. They were firing the one person who could actually stabilize the platform. Evan opened the black folder and slid a document across the conference table toward me. Termination paperwork. Already printed. Already signed. My name stared back at me in bold letters. Reason for dismissal. Operational negligence. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. Operational negligence? I still had time-stamped emails warning them the update would destabilize warehouse synchronization if they removed the fallback protocols. Damien approved the launch anyway, because delaying rollout would have hurt quarterly numbers. And now he was pinning everything on me in front of investors. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself not to show it. You're making a mistake, I said quietly. Damien looked at me like he was already done thinking about me. No, he replied, I'm solving one. That sentence hit harder than the firing itself, because suddenly I understood my real value to him. Disposable. The security guard beside me shifted awkwardly. Ma'am, I closed my laptop slowly, and that's when I noticed something strange. Jordan from engineering was staring at me intensely from across the room. Not scared, not guilty, warning me. Tiny movement, barely noticeable. He tapped 2 fingers against his closed laptop twice, then looked toward the compliance folder in Evan's hands. My pulse spiked instantly. There was something inside that folder besides termination papers, something Jordan wanted me to notice. Before I could react, Evan reached for the documents again. And a new alert exploded across the projector screen in giant red letters. Core architecture failure detected. The entire room froze. Then every monitor in the conference room went black. Every screen in the conference room died at the exact same time. The projector, the executive tablets, even the dashboard monitors mounted along the walls. Gone. A low murmur spread through the room instantly. Then came the phones. One after another, executives started checking notifications as alerts flooded in faster than anyone could read them. Warehouse disconnects, shipment delays, client escalation requests, system-wide synchronization failures. The panic that had been simmering underneath the meeting finally surfaced. And for the first time that morning, nobody was looking at me anymore. They were looking at Damien. What the hell is happening? One investor demanded. The IT director was already halfway out of his chair. We lost the primary routing environment. How? We don't know yet. That's not an answer. The room erupted into overlapping voices. Damien turned sharply toward me, like he suddenly remembered I existed. I saw it happen in real time. The shift 30 seconds ago. I was the scapegoat. Now, I was the person in the room most likely to understand what had just happened. And he hated that. You, he said, pointing again. What did you do? The accusation hit so fast, I almost didn't process it. I actually stared at him for a second in disbelief. Are you serious? You were responsible for this infrastructure. Was, I corrected, his jaw tightened. Behind him, Evan Mercer stepped forward carefully. Unlike Damien, he looked less emotional now, more observant, like he was watching a story unfold that suddenly wasn't matching the script he'd been given. Damien, Evan said quietly, we should move this discussion private. No, Damien's voice came out too fast, too sharp, because he was losing control. You don't get to sabotage my company and walk out innocent. That did it. Several people in the room exchanged uncomfortable looks. Not because they believed him, because the accusation sounded desperate. I took a slow breath and forced myself to stay calm. I warned you the fallback protections were unstable after the update. You approved the deployment architecture. I approved the protected version. The room got quiet again. Tiny detail. Massive difference. And Damien knew it. That's why he immediately cut me off. Escort her out. The security guards moved again, but slower this time. Hesitant, even they could feel something was wrong. Jordan suddenly stood up from his seat near the back wall. Actually, he said carefully, Lelah did send escalation reports. The room snapped toward him. Jordan looked like he regretted speaking immediately, but he kept going. She flagged synchronization risks before rollout. Damien stared at him. Cold. Dangerously cold. You want to repeat that? Jordan swallowed hard. No one answered her emails, he said quietly. Dead silence. I looked at Jordan in shock. He had stayed silent during the firing. But now he was speaking, and judging by the expressions around the room, that was not supposed to happen. Damien laughed once. Short, humorless. So now everyone suddenly wants to rewrite history? No one's rewriting anything, I said. Evan slowly opened the Black compliance folder again. I noticed something important immediately. His expression had changed. Before, he looked prepared, certain. Now he looked concerned. He scanned one of the pages inside the folder, then glanced toward Damien. Why weren't these escalation reports included in the review package? There it was, a crack. Small, but real. Damien's answer came instantly because they weren't relevant. I almost spoke again, but stopped myself. Something felt off, very off, because Damien wasn't acting like a man managing a technical failure anymore. He was acting like someone trying to contain exposure. The IT director's phone rang suddenly. He answered immediately, listened, then went pale. Sir, he whispered toward Damien, the Denver warehouse just disconnected entirely. What does that mean? It means inventory tracking is blind right now. One investor stood up immediately. How much inventory? Nobody answered. The silence itself was the answer. Too much. The conference room suddenly felt smaller, hotter. People started talking over each other again. Legal liability, contract breaches, insurance exposure, millions of dollars floating around the room in terrified whispers. And standing in the middle of all of it, still holding my terminated employee paperwork, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't a temporary outage. The architecture itself was collapsing because somebody had removed core protections from the system. Protections I built personally. Protections Damien forced into production without testing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again immediately. Same number. Something in my gut told me to answer. I stepped slightly away from the table and picked up, hello? Static. Then a voice whispered, do not let them access the backup servers. I froze. Who is this? The line disconnected instantly. I stared at my phone, heart pounding. Slowly, I looked back up toward the conference room. Nobody had noticed the call, except Jordan. And the expression on his face told me one thing immediately. He knew exactly who had just called me. Then Damien slammed both hands onto the conference table again. Everyone stays here until we fix this. But across the room, Evan Mercer quietly closed the compliance folder. And for the first time since entering that meeting, he looked directly at Damien with suspicion. Evan Mercer was no longer looking at me like the problem. He was looking at Damien, and Damien noticed. You could actually see the moment it registered, the tiny hesitation, the controlled breathing, the shift from aggressive to calculated. That scared me more than the yelling. Because men like Damien only got quieter when they realized they might lose control of the room. We need a containment strategy, one investor said sharply. Right now, no one is leaving until we understand the scope, Damien replied. The scope? Another executive snapped. We just lost Denver. Possibly more, the IT director muttered. The room exploded again. People talking over each other. Phones ringing nonstop. Assistants rushing in and out with updates. And somehow, in the middle of all that chaos, Damien still found time to glare at me like this was my fault. Evan stepped closer to the conference table. Lelah, he said calmly, did you or did you not raise concerns before deployment? Every eye in the room turned toward me again. Different this time, not judgment, need. I reached slowly into my laptop bag and pulled out my company-issued tablet. One of the guards immediately moved. Her access was revoked, Damien said. I know, I replied. Then I pressed the power button. The tablet booted up anyway. A few confused faces turned toward IT. I looked directly at Damien. I built portions of the authorization structure myself, remember? His expression hardened instantly because I had just reminded everyone in the room of something he wanted buried. I wasn't some clueless junior employee. I was one of the people who built the infrastructure they depended on. The tablet loaded. I opened my archived mail folders. Dozens of unread warning chains appeared on screen. Subject lines filled with words executives hated seeing. Critical risk. Sync, failure, possibility. Do not deploy current build. I turned the screen toward Evan. You asked if I warned management. He took the tablet carefully, started reading. The room slowly went quiet again. One email, then another time-stamped, documented, ignored. I watched the color drain from Damien's face. Those were preliminary concerns, he said quickly. No, I replied. Those were final escalation reports. Jordan finally spoke again from across the room. She requested deployment delays twice. Damien snapped toward him. Enough. But now other people were starting to remember things too. A logistics manager near the back spoke carefully. I remember the delay recommendation. Another voice. She asked for additional stress testing. And just like that, the silence protecting Damien started cracking apart. Not fully, but enough. Evan closed the tablet slowly. When exactly was the fallback protection removed? Nobody answered, which was answer enough because fallback protection should never be removed casually, especially not during active expansion. I crossed my arms. It wasn't removed accidentally. That landed hard. Even the investors reacted to that one. What's that supposed to mean? Damien asked. I stared at the giant dead projector screen behind him. The architecture was modified after my approval stage. That's speculation. No, I said quietly, it's system behavior. The IT director looked visibly nervous now. He avoided eye contact completely. And suddenly I understood why. He knew maybe not everything, but enough. Evan noticed too. Who authorized the modifications? Still no answer. Then a notification appeared on Damien's phone. He looked down, and for the first time all morning, he looked genuinely afraid. Not angry, not defensive, afraid. One investor stood up immediately. What now? Damien didn't answer right away. That alone made the room tense instantly. Finally, he said, Phoenix Medical suspended their contract. The room erupted. That was their biggest client. Multi-state pharmaceutical logistics, millions in revenue, gone. One executive actually whispered, "We're dead." And that's when something clicked into place inside my head. This failure wasn't spreading randomly. It was cascading through connected warehouse systems exactly the way I predicted it would if synchronization safeguards were bypassed, which meant someone didn't just ignore my warnings. They altered the architecture knowingly. Evan turned toward me again. If the protections were restored now, could the system stabilize? Before I could answer, Damien interrupted immediately. She's done enough damage already. That sentence hit the room wrong. You could feel it because now people were starting to notice something important. Damien was more focused on controlling me than fixing the crisis. I looked directly at Evan. Yes, I said, but only if the original architecture still exists. The IT director suddenly looked down at the floor. My stomach tightened. No, I said slowly, tell me you didn't overwrite the recovery environment. Nobody spoke. I took a step forward. You replaced it? Still silence. Then the IT director whispered, the board wanted faster scaling. I actually laughed once out of disbelief because that single sentence explained everything. They didn't understand the infrastructure. They just wanted growth numbers, investor reports, expansion headlines. So they stripped out the safety layers, slowing synchronization, verification, exactly what I warned them not to do. And now the company was bleeding out in real time because of it. My phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. This time there was a text message. Check the executive admin logs before they wipe them. I looked up immediately. Jordan was already watching me. Then he glanced not at Damien, but toward the CFO's empty chair at the far end of the room. Empty. My pulse spiked. Richard Vale, the CFO, wasn't here. In the middle of the biggest operational collapse in company history, the CFO was missing. And suddenly that felt a lot more important than anyone else in the room realized. Richard Vale's chair was still empty 15 minutes later. And now everyone was noticing it. Where is Richard? One investor demanded. Nobody answered immediately. Damien rubbed both hands over his face like he was trying to buy himself time. He's handling external communications. It sounded weak the second he said it, because external communications didn't matter anymore. Not when entire warehouse systems were collapsing live. The IT director's phone rang. Again. He answered, listened, then closed his eyes. Seattle disconnected. A curse exploded from somewhere near the back of the room. Another executive stood up abruptly. That's 3 distribution regions. 4. Someone corrected quietly. The room descended into panic again. And through all of it, I kept thinking about the message on my phone. Check the executive admin logs before they wipe them. Not if, before, which meant someone inside the company was actively destroying evidence right now. I looked toward Jordan again. He gave the smallest nod imaginable. That was enough. I turned to Evan. I need server access. Damien immediately stepped in. No, every head turned toward him. Too fast, too defensive. Evan noticed too. Why not? Because she's no longer employed here. That didn't stop her from being the only person who understands your infrastructure, Evan replied. The room got quiet again. Damien's jaw tightened. For a second, I thought he was going to explode. Instead, he forced out a controlled breath. Fine. Limited access only. Too late. The damage to his authority was already visible. An hour ago, he controlled the room completely. Now, investors were questioning him openly. Executives were avoiding eye contact, and compliance was no longer automatically on his side. We moved quickly down the executive hallway toward the operations floor. The atmosphere outside the conference room was chaos. Employees stood clustered around monitors, phones ringing nonstop, managers shouting updates across departments. Some people stopped talking entirely when they saw me walking beside Evan, like they'd seen a ghost. Others looked confused because, according to company emails, I was supposedly the reason this disaster happened. So why was leadership suddenly bringing me back inside? One woman from logistics quietly whispered as I passed, "That's her." Not angry, not mocking, worried. We entered the network operations center. Rows of giant monitors covered the walls, displaying live warehouse failures spreading across the country. Red indicators blinked nonstop. Denver, Seattle, Phoenix, Chicago. Every disconnect triggered another wave of financial losses. The lead systems engineer rushed toward us immediately. "We're losing audit synchronization now." My stomach dropped. That was catastrophic. Without audit synchronization, inventory tracking could no longer verify what physically existed versus what the system claimed existed, which meant pharmaceuticals, medical supplies, and contracted inventory were effectively disappearing on paper. Evan looked at me. "How bad is that?" I answered honestly, "If this spreads nationally, they won't just lose clients." I looked at Damien. "They could trigger a federal investigation." The room went silent because everyone understood what that meant. Not bad press, not layoffs, criminal exposure. Damien stepped closer immediately. "Don't exaggerate." I turned toward one of the monitors and pulled up a live reconciliation stream. Lines of corrupted reporting data flooded the screen. Modified timestamps, duplicate shipment IDs, impossible inventory counts. My pulse started rising fast. This wasn't simple negligence anymore. Some of these changes were intentional, carefully intentional. I started typing quickly. "What are you doing?" Damien asked. "Checking admin modification history." "You don't have authorization for that." I wrote the authorization framework. His face darkened instantly. I accessed the executive level logs, then froze. Hundreds of administrative overrides, most linked to restricted executive accounts. And one name appeared over and over again: Richard Vale. Timestamp after timestamp. Manual reporting adjustments. Inventory reconciliation bypasses. forecast modifications. I felt cold all at once because now I understood why the system collapse looked so strange. The architecture hadn't simply been weakened, it had been manipulated. To fake performance, Evan moved beside me. What am I looking at? I enlarged one of the reports. See these shipment completion numbers? Yes, they're impossible. How? Because the inventory never existed. Silence. One systems engineer actually turned around slowly from his workstation. What? I kept scrolling. The deeper I went, the worse it became. Artificial fulfillment boosts, suppressed warehouse delays, manual override approvals hidden inside executive permissions. This company hadn't just hidden failures. They'd been altering operational data to make expansion numbers look stronger to investors. My chest tightened. And suddenly, Damien's behavior over the past year made perfect sense. The firing, the public humiliation, the urgency to blame me immediately. If anyone investigated the original architecture closely, they'd eventually discover the modifications. And if they discovered the modifications, they'd discover who approved them. Evan looked toward Damien slowly. Did you know about this? Damien answered too quickly. No, but nobody believed him anymore. Not after what we were seeing. Then one of the engineers shouted from across the room, someone's remotely deleting archives. I spun toward the nearest monitor. Entire log clusters were vanishing in real time. Somebody was wiping evidence right now, and there was only one executive missing from the building. Richard Vale. I immediately started copying the remaining logs onto an isolated backup drive. My hands moved so fast, they almost hurt. Evan grabbed a phone and started calling legal. The operations floor erupted into panic. Employees shouting, security rushing between departments, alerts flooding every screen. And in the middle of all that chaos, Damien Cross stared at the disappearing files with the expression of a man watching his entire life collapse in front of him. Then my screen loaded one final hidden archive: private executive communications, restricted access, encrypted, but not enough. I opened the folder, and the first file that appeared made my blood run cold. A recording dated 1 week before my firing. The operations floor went strangely quiet around me, not completely silent. Phones were still ringing. People were still shouting across departments. But all of it sounded distant suddenly because I was staring at that recording dated 7 days before Damien fired me in front of the company. 7 days, meaning whatever happened in that conference room had been decided long before the system failed publicly. My hand tightened around the mouse. Evan stepped closer beside me. What is it? I clicked the file. Static crackled through the speakers first. Then voices, multiple executives sitting in a room somewhere inside the building. I recognized them immediately. Richard Vale, Damien Cross. Two board members. And then Damien's voice came through clearly. Cold, calm, controlled. If the rollout fails, responsibility stays with Carter. My chest tightened instantly. Nobody around me moved. The recording continued. One board member asked, "Can she prove the warnings were ignored?" Richard answered before Damien could. Not if access is restricted immediately. Another voice. She's too low level to fight this publicly anyway. A few seconds of paper shuffling followed. Then Damien spoke again. We need investors stable before earnings. Public accountability matters more than internal accuracy right now. Internal accuracy? I actually felt sick hearing it because they knew the risks. They knew the safeguards were removed, and they planned to blame me before the collapse even happened. The room around me had gone completely still. Even the engineers nearby had stopped working. Everyone was listening. Every ugly second of it. Then came the part that shattered whatever defense Damien still had left. One executive asked quietly, "What if the architecture itself breaks?" Damien answered immediately, "Then we rebuild it after the quarter closes." Like people's lives weren't attached to those systems. Like missing pharmaceutical inventory and nationwide shipment failures were just temporary inconveniences. The recording ended. No one spoke. I slowly turned around. Damien looked pale, not angry anymore, not defensive, defeated. Evan stared at him with open disbelief. "You scapegoated her intentionally?" Damien opened his mouth, closed it, then finally said, "You don't understand the pressure we were under." That was his answer. Not denial, justification. The room exploded. One investor started shouting immediately. Another demanded legal counsel. Employees began talking over each other in panic. And somewhere behind me, one of the engineers muttered, "Oh my God." Evan turned toward security instantly. Lockdown executive access. Nobody leaves this building without authorization. For the first time all day, Damien looked genuinely powerless. Not because the systems failed, because the truth was finally visible. Within an hour, federal investigators arrived at headquarters. Not auditors anymore, investigators. People in dark jackets carrying evidence cases and legal warrants. The atmosphere inside Veyron Dynamics changed instantly. Executives stopped acting important. Managers stopped pretending everything was under control. People were scared now, actually scared. I spent the next several hours walking investigators through the architecture changes, the deleted safeguards, the manipulated reporting systems, the executive override logs tied to Richard Vale's account. Every answer led to worse questions. By evening, financial news stations were already reporting possible corporate fraud investigations tied to Veyron Dynamics. And then the clip resurfaced. My firing, someone inside the company leaked the conference room footage online. Millions of people watched Damien call me useless. But this time, the recording leaked too. The full context, the planning, the setup. Public opinion flipped almost overnight. Former coworkers started messaging me constantly. Some apologized. Some admitted they knew something was wrong, but stayed quiet because they were afraid of losing their jobs. Mia showed up at my office 3 days later. She looked exhausted, guilty. "I should have said something," she admitted quietly. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "You should have." She nodded immediately. Like she'd already been telling herself that every day for the past year. And honestly, that hurt more than if she defended herself. Because I knew she meant it. Over the next few months, everything collapsed for Damien. The board forced his resignation. Major clients terminated contracts permanently. Multiple executives, including Richard Vail, became subjects of federal investigation. Investors filed lawsuits. Employees lost bonuses. Entire departments were restructured. And Damien, the man who stood in front of 70 people and called me useless, became the public face of corporate scapegoating. I saw him one last time nearly 6 months later, not in a conference room, not in some towering executive office, outside my building, waiting, just like I once waited outside his office, hoping he'd finally answer my warnings. He looked older, smaller somehow, like the pressure that once made him powerful had finally crushed him too. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I didn't answer immediately because part of me had imagined this moment for a long time, the apology, the regret, the reversal. But standing there, it didn't feel satisfying the way I thought it would. Just sad. You didn't destroy my career, I told him finally. His expression tightened slightly. You destroyed your company. He looked down after that. No argument, no defense, because he knew it was true. After everything that happened, I never went back to Veyron. They offered twice. I turned them down both times. Instead, I partnered with a smaller logistics startup that actually cared about stability instead of fake growth metrics. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just an employee. I had equity, authority, a voice people listened to before disaster happened instead of after. And sometimes I still think about that morning in the conference room. The humiliation, the silence. The moment Damien pointed at me and called me useless in front of everyone, back then I thought losing that job was the worst thing that could happen to me. Turns out it was the thing that exposed who everyone really was.